So we're at part 4 now, current global finance. So why is the US, the West in general, losing social economic leadership to China and other Eastern countries in general? Well, the simplest answer is because of foreign policy. In general and historically, how does US Western foreign policy work? US foreign policy, at least for the last 100 years or so since the central bankers took over in 1913, has been very imperialistic, similar to previous empires before it, such as the British Empire and the Spanish Empire. Now, U.S. hasn't always foreign policy hasn't always been that way. Prior to 1913, like in the 19th century, it was isolationist, but now it's becoming more and more imperialistic, more global empire. So the U.S. currently has over 1,000 bases spread worldwide in over 150 countries. So this is what U.S. foreign policy globalization is. Uh, Basically, they have used their navy to travel to foreign countries to build a massive military base. Then what they do, once they have a foreign base in a foreign land, they try to control the local government. And so how does the US currently implement its foreign policy? In ages past, such as when the British Empire, the Spanish Empire was was around, the way they would colonize was very implicit. You know, they would travel to foreign lands with their navy, create a base, then they would have a standing army, then they would either kill like all the native Indians or subjugate the native indigenous people. But nowadays, the rest of the world has frowned on that kind of behavior, that colonialism, the traditional way at least. Um, so the U.S. is more subtle. They use neocolonialism. And the way it works is, they still travel to foreign bases, they still travel to foreign lands to make bases, but they're much more subtle about it. So instead of using a standing army, they use a provoking agent. And the provoking agent is key. So, in any nation, of course, there's going to be some, discontent with people. There are going to be protests for, say, like workers' rights or whatever. So they would use a provoking agent to rally the people to make them, be violent and, cause a massive destruction. Not massive, maybe just like they might have like riots and they might destroy like a few police cars or something like that. In extreme cases, they use snipers, like what they did in Ukraine, and they would shoot protesters from both sides. Then this will cause riots and more violence. Then after a while, after there's been so much violence, so much civil war in the country, the U.S. With its NATO allies, they come in for quote humanitarian reasons, and they help rebuild the country by offering it a massive loan, usually through or the IMF or through the World Bank. And debt is a way to transfer commodities and resources to be under the control of the financial institutions. So they if the country can't pay the loan to rebuild its country, they take the IMF or the World Bank to take control of resources and property like oil through their central banking mechanism. So what's the main reason Philippines is a small and poor country with a corrupt government? And the simple answer is, I believe, it's because of U.S. foreign policy. Its U.S. foreign policy is very similar to British Empire, Spanish Empire. And for almost 500 years now, the Philippine Islands have been used as a base of operations to invade the rest of Asia. These great Western powers have been isolating the Philippine Islands keeping it small and poor, so it can be used as a slave nation, basically, as a land of cheap resources, cheap labor, and easy women, basically. Prostitution in Southeast Asia is a really booming industry because so much Navy personnel from Western countries such as the U.S. Travel to those lands, and they're all guys, of course, and they need a fun time, right? And like during Marcos's time, so why he was so powerful is because the U.S. really loved Marcos because he was very open to the exploitation of the Philippine people. Paying them outrageously low wages, 1/10, 1/20th of what you would pay American workers, and exploitation, the raping and pillaging of the lands, basically, and it's still continuing till this day. Actually, the U.S. has started to build more bases in in Southeast Asia again, and they want to retrofit these bases with missile bases so that they can basically contain China. So that's what's happening in the Southeast Asia. So how and why is the U.S. and its allies isolating Russia and China? On Eastern Europe, the U.S. is building this massive missile system in neighboring countries to Russia, and basically they make puppet governments of all these countries like Poland, Romania, and now Ukraine, and their goal is really to build bases on these countries that they're puppet governments and build missile bases. Basically, they want to point more guns at the head of Russia, and the reasons they want to do this is because Russia and China, they're leading the effort for a new world payment system that's not going to be dollar based. So the central bankers are going to lose their power if Russia and China continue what they're doing. So how is Chinese Eastern foreign policy radically different than the U.S. or Western foreign policy in general? Well, China, as you guys probably know, they don't have foreign bases in other countries. They're not like building missile bases, or Russia and China, they're not building missile bases all over the border of the U.S. and Canada or U.S. and Mexico. What China does is, instead of traveling to foreign lands with its military, it travels with its tradespeople, business people, craftsmen, and they find the biggest, most prosperous city in a nation they can find. Then they start opening up Chinatowns. And once they're in Chinatown, they live very modest lifestyle. And so if you're a foreign businessman, let me ask you, who would you rather do business with? The Americans who are putting a gun next to your head by building a massive military base on your lands, or the Chinese who are living in the local Chinatown, living a very humble, modest lifestyle. Let me think. I would rather do business with the Chinese if all possible. So this is the main reason why U.S. is losing out to China, because their foreign policy is so much better than the U.S., which is very messed up with all these military bases, and they're intimidating everyone. They're military. So why does the U.S. have such a massive navy? So here's a chart from Wiki. The U.S. has about 19 aircraft carriers. I mean, that's huge compared to other countries. Like Russia only has one. China only has one aircraft carrier. Why does the U.S. have such a massive navy? And the reason why is because it needs a massive navy in order to impose its imperial global policy, where it uses its naval military power basically to intimidate other countries to its will, to do whatever it wants economically. It's a very aggressive foreign policy, and the rest of the world doesn't like this now, and they're trying to get away from doing business with the U.S. if possible. So let me take a drink of water again. How is the foundation of global Western financial leadership, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, being greatly threatened right now. So, the rest of the world is getting sick and tired of Western financial leadership because, they're living a very extravagant lifestyle in Western countries, but the rest of the world is suffering because of their crappy Western policies and their corrupt financial system. So they're starting to build their own financial system, such as the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, which is led by China. Many countries are joining that now. And there's also a BRICS Bank. So basically, on a micro level, it's like you taking your money from, say, a Bank of America and transferring it into a local credit union. So basically, countries are taking their money from the U.S. banks and putting it in another country. So it's sort of like a bank run, sort of on a global scale instead. So the U.S. is eventually going to lose world reserve currency status, and the demand for U.S. dollar is going to greatly decline. Okay. And in the new setup in the BRICS Bank, compared to the World Bank, the BRICS founders such as Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, they have a much more greater voting power. So they'll be able to influence financial policy, which means these countries are going to have in the future are going to have much more buying power compared to what they have now. And the other countries in the West, especially skewed to Eastern Europe and the US and Canada, they're going to have much lower buying power in comparison to what they have now. So also, gold has been, for the last few decades, been flowing from west to east. So China is buying all the gold, and so is Russia, and India, and Brazil somewhat too. And people are speculating that Russia, China want to eventually return to a gold standard, which was ended by Nixon in 1971. So if the world will return back to a gold standard, the U.S. dollar will be collapsed because, America doesn't have the gold anymore to back up the number of U.S. dollars it has in the system. So what will be the repercussions of a U.S. dollar collapse and another major economic reset? So the simple answer is that the buying power of people in the U.S. lands right now in other Western countries such as Canada and Australia and New Zealand and UK, their buying power is going to severely diminish, and they're going to switch to a new payment system. So it won't be dollar-based, it'll be, I don't know what, SDR, or maybe something based on gold or something different. And also, if you have any kind of, say if you're making, your income is like $100,000 now, your income might just go down to $10,000 or $1,000 of the new world money, whatever that is. And also, if you have any kind of existing debt, like if you have a mortgage for, say, like $600,000 or something, it's going to go up maybe like 2, 3, 10 times more. So your income is going to go down, and any existing debt you have is going to be revalued for the new money system, and so it's going to go up. So Western countries are going to get poorer in general, and Eastern countries are going to get richer in general. So here's a good question. Why don't you learn about banking and monetary history in even the most elitist Ivy League schools and in the popular mainstream? And the simple answer is that it's because the most elitist Ivy League schools and the popular mainstream are funded by the central bankers, by the financial institutions. So they have a lot of say of what's said in the curriculum and in the news media. Here's a good chart. So why is the gap between the rich and poor constantly increasing worldwide? So here's a comparison from 1978 to 2011. Basically, the increase in worker compensation has only increased 5.7%, and CEO pay has increased almost 800% from 1978. So who do you think the CEOs have their allegiance towards their workers, or the people who pay them a lot of money in bonuses and in their salary, which are the banking, the financial institutions? And that's the biggest problem in the world right now, is that the banks are using their ability to create unlimited amounts of money to corrupt the leadership of every nation worldwide in every area, not only in business, but also in entertainment too, and in the media, in politics. They're all being corrupted by banker money. So the leaders in the global financial system is the Rothschild family. And the founding member was Mayer Amschel Rothschild from 1974 to 1812. His famous quote was, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." And he was the founding father of international finance. This according to Forbes magazines. And a descendant of his was Nathan Rothschild. He said, "I care not what puppet is on place on the throne of England, to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the money supply." Here's the current patriarch of the family, which is Jacob Rothschild. "My family is worth over $500 trillion. We own nearly every central bank in the world. We finance both sides of every war since Napoleon. We own your news, the media, your oil, and the government. You have probably never heard of me." And so these are all the famous Rothschilds, and basically they own the media, so you never heard about what their plans are. They own the government too, and they're all Jewish too. So that's one reason why the U.S. has such a strong connection with the Jewish state of Israel in the Middle East. Now here's the quote by the founding father of the U.S., Thomas Jefferson. "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs." See, the original founders of the U.S. Republic, they never intended there to be a Federal Reserve or income tax because they knew how corrupt the banking system was. That's one reason why they fled England, from the taxation and in the banking system there. It was so corrupt. So they required that the U.S. money be backed by gold or silver, in which it has for the most history of the U.S. till 1971, when Nixon took it off the gold standard. And also this is happening in media. What 6 companies own over 90% of U.S. media? In 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 companies. Now in 2011, the same 90% is owned by 6 companies. So there's a massive consolidation here happening. Don't trust the popular mainstream media. It's mostly to mislead and distract and entertain you, so to keep you docile, so you don't do like a massive revolution, massive protest with the powers, the status quo, the powers that be right now. So here's the hierarchy of everything if you look at it. This is from the Thrive movement. In the very bottom is people, planet, and living things. On top of that is the government. On top of the government is those corporatocracies, such as major oil companies like Exxon, Monsanto. And on top of them are the big banks, the Citibank, Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Wells Fargo. And on top of them is the national central banks, such as the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and top of them are the international central banks, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and on top of them is the International Bank for Settlements, which is owned by the Rothschild family. And on top of them is no one really knows, it's the financial elites, which are these royal banking families. Some say they're the Illuminati, some just think of them as a group of very powerful men that for generations have their royal banking families, basically, that know the control, the power to create money. Okay. So for almost 2 years now, what has been happening to prominent bankers and some corporate lawyers worldwide? Take a drink of water real quick. So look at this picture. You see this banker jumping from, say, like the 50 or 60th story of a of a high-rise building. So for over 2 years now, the mainstream media has been claiming that these bankers have been committing suicide, but many in the alternative media are saying that they're either, maybe committing suicide, or many are also being killed by the central bankers and their death squads. That is, in the way I look at it, if you work for the central bankers or the banking families or the corporate elites, it's like working for the mafia. They'll give you a good, prestigious job, making a lot of money, but you have to do some unethical things, and if you develop cold feet, you don't have the balls basically to do what they want, the unethical things they want, then they take you out, or you develop so much remorse that you kill yourself. So that's why so many bankers have been dying for the last few years. Many speculate also there might be another whistleblower like Snowden that may come out and expose that there's another financial scheme that's happening right now. So there's more information on that. It's been happening worldwide in a global scale. Like for the last 2 years now, every week there's another banker or even corporate lawyer that's getting killed. And here's a good quote by John F. Kennedy. There's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot. And that's from President John F. Kennedy 7 days before his assassination. And as you might know, Kennedy was very opposed to central banking and the Federal Reserve in general. So many people suspect that it was the death squads of the Federal Reserve or other central bankers that killed him. So how are Western governments preparing for major collapse? Well, in a simple way, they're militarizing their police. They're giving the police military training, military vehicles, and they're becoming more violent. As some of you saw in the recent Baltimore protest, they instituted martial law. There was a curfew, and the police are getting more violent in general. Before they used to be part of the community. Now they're more isolationists, and they're using more excessive means to subdue their people. Okay, and the U.S. government has established FEMA, which is Federal Emergency Management Agency, what it stands for. And they have all these FEMA camps, dozens of FEMA camps spread nationwide. And here's how they look, these FEMA camps. So they all have these warning signs. Warning, this facility has been declared a restricted area according to Secretary of Defense directive issued, blah, blah, blah. And if you look at them, you see they have barbed wires, but they're not pointed outside, they're pointed inside. So this prevents people from trying to escape. And if you really look at them, they look like Nazi concentration camps. So in the event of another major global protest, such as like what happened in Occupy movement, if there's a bigger one, there's like from a major financial crash or whatever, they can capture all the dissidents and put them in these concentration camps, And FEMA also has a massive coffin facility in case of any kind of, major civil unrest, which will lead to a lot of deaths, or any other major, like maybe war or like a disease or a nuclear attack or something where there's going to be a lot of deaths. They're already prepared with massive coffin facilities as well. And they have these human cadaver incineration containers as well, so they could easily dispose of dead bodies in the event of a major calamity or where a lot of people die. So before, what are bank bailouts now? Before, in 2008, there was a bank bailout. So after Lehman Brothers collapsed, it was about to take the other major banks like Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America with it. So what they did, they took trillions of dollars from the U.S. citizens, and they transferred them to the financial elites, the owners of the banks, and the CEOs got massive, bonuses for the scheme. But now, what's happening is the banks are doing bail-ins. So, what's the definition? A bail-in is when regulators or government have statutory powers to restructure the liabilities of a distressed financial institution and impose losses on both bondholders and depositors. And if you look at there's some funny monopoly images like, oh, bank error in their favor, pay 50% of your wealth, or bank bail-in or bail-out. Same person, same result, different pocket. In Europe right now, they have negative interest rates. So this is absolutely ludicrous to me. So say you have $100,000 in the bank. They're not going to pay you interest anymore. They're going to charge you maybe $2,000 or $3,000 a month. A year to keep your money in the bank. So what's the point of putting your money in the bank with negative interest rates? Why don't you just put your money underneath your sofa or underneath your bed? That makes no financial sense to have in the bank anymore. Okay. And this is only going to get worse as time progresses. There's going to be more bank bail-ins, more negative interest rates, and they're going to confiscate your pensions maybe, or in 401ks, or more of your savings or whatever. They're going to take it from the people. And also this coming summer, from mid-July to mid-September, for 8 weeks, there's going to be a Jade Helm 15, which is a special forces training exercise scheduled to take place in 10 southwestern states. And Jade Helm is a massive field training exercise to enhance the survival, evasion, resistant, escape capabilities of American Special Operation troops. So they're starting to, prepare for major civil unrest, and they're getting the logistics down already, and they're having actual practices. And, eventually this might not just be a practice. When it becomes live, they may, like what the Nazis did, they may actually come to your home and, either take your belongings, maybe your gold, silver, or your guns, or they may actually take the actual people themselves, and put them in these FEMA camps or whatever. And Jade Helm, if you think about it, from the dictionary, jaded means dulled or satiated by overindulgence, or worn out or wearied as by overwork or reuse. Helm is a wheel or tiller by which a ship is steered, or the place or post of control. So if you really think about it, Jade Helm means the group or organization leading these people, like the American public that has been so much on welfare that they're overindulged and they just don't care anymore. So they're leading these lambs to slaughter, basically. And their motto for Jade Helm is "Master the Human Domain." And here's actually an old map of all the states that are having these military drills at the same time for 8 weeks. This is the largest type of massive military drill since the last Civil War or something. It's been, this has never happened domestically. And they've already categorized all these states as like red, hostile; blue, permissive; brown, uncertain, leading hostile; light blue, uncertain, leading friendly. So the governor of Texas is getting really worried about these exercises, and he has the National Guard looking out for these Jade Helm military troops and seeing what they're doing, make sure they don't violate any American civil liberties. So that's the end of part 4. We'll resume in the last section, part 5, which is family finances.